Welcome, folks. Today we're gonna dive into one of the most debated topics in the gaming community. Is emulating video games a sin?
Look, we all love playing retro games like Super Mario Brothers, Pokemon, and other games that we grew up with. But not everyone has access to the original hardware or game cartridges. So what do? They use emulators, a software that allows us to play video games on a computer. I'm not paying $300 to play Fire Emblem Path of Radiance. I'll just emulate it on my laptop for free. And I'm not paying $100 to play Paper Mario the 1,000-Year Door. I'll just emulate it.
But isn't that illegal?
Well, technically, it's illegal to download and distribute copyrighted games. But emulators themselves are legal.
As you can see, there's many different sides of the debate, and there are many different forms of emulation. There are even legal forms of emulation, such as these old game collections. Like with Sonic's Ultimate Genesis collection, you can emulate Sega Genesis games legally on your PS3. There are also Sega Genesis collections on Nintendo Switch, PS4, and I think even Xbox. And the other forms of emulation are downloading like emulators such as the Dolphin emulator and Visual Boy Advance on computers. There's emulators on the phone, and there's also modded consoles, such as some people hack a 3DS, some people hack PlayStation 3. But here's an example of legal emulation on the PS3. Since I bought this game legitly, I can play all these Sega Genesis games and I'm not breaking the law.
Sega.
And the quality of emulation is likely to be better on collections such as this, or remasters or remakes, than it would be if you would just download it on a computer. Though for old systems like Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo, it is very easy to emulate. But when it comes to systems like Nintendo GameCube and PS3 and beyond that, that's where it gets more complicated. And emulating GameCube or PS3, you might experience a lot of frame rate issues, glitches, and other problems. But old hardware like this is easy to emulate. And this Sega Genesis is pretty much on every system. I think, yeah, even GameCube had Sonic's Mega Collection, and PS2 I think had Sega Genesis games as well. So this is just one of the many forms of emulation that is legal. But some emulation does involve piracy, which is illegal. And technically, if you consider piracy stealing, I guess that would make it a sin.
Yeah, some people believe that emulating games is equivalent to stealing or pirating, while others view it as a way of preserving classic games that may no longer be available or playable on modern consoles.
So is it really a sin to emulate video games? Let's hear from the experts.
From the early days of the underground, where it was frowned upon and even contested in court, the importance of emulation cannot be understated. Back then, few people realized its true value and purpose, especially when it comes to preservation. But fast forward to 2019, emulation is everywhere. The NES and Super NES games on the Switch, for example, the mini consoles that have entered the market over the last couple of years, to games on your cell phone, throwback games, and then hardware devices like the Neo Geo and Capcom arcade sticks. All of these are examples and use emulation to provide the gaming experience. So why do we even use emulation? Well, there are many different reasons. First is for preservation, as mentioned. Some games are out of print, too expensive, or just so rare that the only recourse is to download an emulator and a copy of the ROM. Game publishers have been at the forefront of emulation for many years, like Digital Eclipse and M2. Others are starting to come around to this, like Square Enix, with releases like the Collection of Mana. If we consider the SNK Neo Geo releases that are available on the Nintendo Switch eShop, acquiring a collection on all original titles that make up this collection on real Neo Geo MVS or worse, AES hardware would cost you a small fortune. Then there's the convenience factor. Playing your favorite NES, Super NES, or Genesis ROMs on your phone is a very compelling reason. But there are other things to consider as well. If you stream or create content, it's a far easier way to show off gameplay rather than connecting up real hardware. And if you don't possess good quality RGB cables, or if the system isn't RGB modded in the first place, then the quality isn't going to look great. Then there is the hacking mindset. Anytime a new system is hacked, the mystery and intrigue is there. What can the hardware do? Can it run Super NES, Nintendo 64, PlayStation, or even Dreamcast? How far can we push the hardware? Emulation is also important for research. Right now, there is great strides being made to PlayStation 3, Xbox 360, Wii U, and even Nintendo Switch emulation. We don't like to talk about these systems because they are still relatively new, and we start to enter a grey area of legal issues.
See? Some games are too expensive, and it's more convenient to emulate. And modern vintage gamer is an expert, so that means emulation is good.
From a game developer's perspective, I might understand why some people might frown upon emulation. But if it wasn't for emulators, many of the great classic games would have been forgotten. And many of these games aren't even accessible in the modern digital markets of today.
I don't think it's a sin. If anything, it's a way to support the industry. Playing an older game through an emulator might make me want to actually buy the actual game.
Yeah, right. Emulation is basically theft. You're playing someone else's game without paying for it.
Let's see what our friends on Twitter have to say about it. On Twitter, I did this poll and I asked, is emulation a sin? This might be an interesting idea for a YouTube video. What do you think? I think nearly half of gamers have emulated at least one game in their life. What do you guys think? 6% said it's wrong to emulate. 51% said it's okay for expensive retro games. 43% said all emulation is okay. Now let's go down to the comments. In this tweet I linked an article. Tony Coffee, the Goomba, says, I always have the stance that once a game isn't commercially available, it's perfectly fine. And Caspar said, that's the correct take. If there's no way to give the publisher devs money for it, I sure as hell am not going to give some rando on eBay money for the right to play it. Exactly, says the Goomba. Like, if the money isn't going to the dev anyway, what does it matter? Nicholas Camp says, 100% this. If the company decides it doesn't want to make money from its product any longer, they really have no say when it comes to emulation. Yep, at that point, it's a free pass. So then I said, so then it's okay to emulate or have a modded 3DS and download whatever game you want for free since they shut down the eShop? Not that I would ever do that or make a YouTube video about it. Tony Coffee, the Goomba, says, yeah, I think so now. I did buy stuff from there till the last day though. And then I said, yeah, I bought a decent amount of physical games. Some games I downloaded a ROM of, but I have the physical copy of it sealed, such as Radiant Historia. Alright, I'll glance over some of the other comments. Said, nice, that game is already super expensive open. And I think that game's going up over $100 on eBay right now. Carl Lavery says, emulation and piracy are two very different things. Nintendo and Sony sell you services that include hundreds of emulated games, such as Nintendo Switch Online, whilst on Xbox, all those 360 and OG games are emulated on Xbox One and Series consoles, plus the hundreds of retro game collections that have released. If it's something you can buy retail, you should buy it. You shouldn't illegally download it. Otherwise, fair game. So it seems like a lot of people have that opinion, like if it's available to buy legally, physically, or digitally for a reasonable price, then you shouldn't emulate it. But if it isn't available on any of these digital services and it's really expensive on eBay, then it's fair game. Carl Lavery says, all emulation is legal. It's how you source the games that you're emulating that either is or isn't. That said, I still have plenty of ROMs that I acquired through questionable means. Savvy. What if you get one of those Chinese emulator consoles that are loaded with games, or a 489-in-1 DS cartridge? You didn't download the games yourself, but it's kinda a gray area. I guess it is kinda wrong, but not as bad as physically stealing from someone. Well, I guess, being a pirate. Well, I'll say no more, but yeah, that's the opinions on Twitter. Only 51 people responded, but that's a lot of engagement compared to what I usually get on posts, so thank you. Maybe if this video goes viral, we could do a larger poll to see what the larger audience thinks, but it seems like the large majority of gamers are okay with emulation, and some of them are only okay with emulating expensive, inaccessible retro games, but not modern games. So, yeah, as you can see, it's a complex issue. but definitely an interesting topic.
So there you have it, folks. Emulating games is a complex issue that sparks both passion and controversy among gamers. While some view it as an innovative way to keep the gaming industry alive, others see it as stealing. What do you think? Is it a sin? Let us know in the comments below.
So emulation is a complex subject with a lot of gray areas. And, well, is it a sin? Maybe a little bit, but it's not as bad as physically stealing from someone. I believe, I prefer to have the physical games, as you can see behind me. But in some cases, emulation is the way. If nobody's selling it in the digital marketplace, Nintendo shut down the 3DS and Wii U eShop. That's a kind of like a green flag to go ahead and emulate or mod your 3DS, in my opinion. But you probably shouldn't pirate modern games that are being sold on the open market, because that can be detrimental to the economy and the game developers. But I mean, not everyone is rich and can afford massive game collections. I mean, I'm fortunate enough to have a decent PS3 and Xbox collection, but most of those games are cheap, like $5 or less. I can't afford to pay $300 for Fire Emblem Path of Radiance, and I can't afford to pay $1,000 for Panzer Dragoon Saga. Stuff like that. If I want to try it, I would have to emulate it, you know? But yeah, it's a gray area, but there's good things about it and there's bad things about it. And as was explained earlier, emulation itself isn't illegal. It's just downloading copyrighted games. Piracy is illegal. But as you can see in the video, you can emulate Sega Genesis games legally. You can emulate some of the old Nintendo games through Nintendo Switch Online, but not all of them. If these companies, Nintendo, PlayStation, Sega, and all of them, made their games more easily available at reasonable prices, then maybe a lot of people wouldn't have to take the option of emulating. They could just put a bunch of all the Sega Genesis games that aren't available, put them up there for $1 each or $5 each or whatever. People would buy them if they were on Switch. People would buy Sega Saturn remakes probably for $20 to $40. Or yeah, the more recent 3D systems, companies like Nintendo can charge more for GameCube remasters. As you can see, they charge $40 for Metroid Prime Remastered. But anyway, thanks for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know what is your opinion about emulation.